address the elephant in the room. Okay. It's a llama. Yes, the llama in the room. Okay. So last week I made a comment that my wife is like Buddy the elf, and so this week I guess is the punishment where I let my wife pick out my outfit for today. So you get to thank her for this wonderful display here. Yeah. Was there something behind me, or? Oh yeah. I don't know what that was about, but all right. All right, so if you're a guest here, obviously we are a very laid-back culture where we just like to goof around and stuff like that, but we do take what we do, proclaiming the gospel, very serious. But before we get into that, we do this other thing where at the beginning of every service, we take a moment and we give a round of applause and recognition to some area of service in this church that matters, because everyone matters in this church who participates in their time and their energy to make what you see happen. And so this morning, we want to give a round of applause to our host team, those who greet you at the door, who smile, who give you the bulletins, who take up the offering. They're a wonderful team and service that we have here at the Bluff. So let's give them a round of applause. So I believe that everyone has a story which they are known by. I'm talking about the stories that, like at every family gathering, everyone always asks you to tell it year after year after year, and your friends will tell others about it, and maybe it's a story which you like, and maybe it's a story which you don't like, but it's just a kind of story that you're known by, okay? Let me give you an example by sharing one of mine. See, when I was a teenager, my church, they used to do this thing where every spring that all the women, all the mothers would have this women's retreat, and someone thought it'd be a great idea that when the women leave on their weekend ministry retreat and all, instead of having their husbands take care of the kids, let's get the teenage guys in the church to take care of their kids the weekend. Not a good idea. I think it was the church's abstinence plan that they were secretly trying to push on us. I'm not really quite sure, but somehow me and two other guys get roped into trying to keep a whole horde of little kids alive for a weekend, and we did all right. I mean, we only lost one kid, but no one remembers that one, so it's okay. Well, this was this was a very tough weekend for us. None of us guys wanted to be part of this, and I remember we were walking around in the gym, and there was a walking track above the gym, and I'm kind of brooding. I'm like, I don't want to be doing this. But things quickly changed for us. Because as we're walking around, the local color guard, high school color guard team was in the gym, and they're throwing their flags and rifles up in the air. And one little kid named Landon, about 4 or 5 years old, and we discovered very quickly that he's incredibly gullible and incredibly curious. Because he looks down at them, he says, what are they doing? And I just made up something at the top of my head. I was like, oh, they're in ninja school, and if they drop a single flag, they'll lose their pinky toe. And immediately, a girl drops her flag, and he screams at the top of his lungs, "You're going to lose your pinky toe." And so here's this room full of all these teenage girls who turn and start looking up at me, and I have this group of kids, and I'm trying not to laugh as I'm trying to get them out of the room. But that was a turning point for the weekend for us guys. Because anytime any of these kids came up with a story saying, why is this happening, or why do we do this, we would make up some crazy story about ninjas and unicorns and dragons, and the kids ate it all up. It was wonderful. This came back to bite us, though, the next day. See, the first thing in the morning when the parents came and dropped off their kids for another day, I'm setting up the VCR to watch VeggieTales with the kids, and one kid comes up to me, he's like, "What's that around your neck?" I was like, "Oh, it's a necklace." He's like, No, the thing in your neck," referring to my rather large Adam's apple. And before I could say, "Oh, it's an Adam's apple," a buddy of mine, one of the other leaders, immediately shouts out, "It's a baby bird. Mason swallowed a baby bird." And then he leans over to Landon and he says, "And if you squeeze it, it will chirp." Some of you could probably tell where this is going. I could see the light bulb go off in Landon's mind, and I knew I was in trouble, but Landon didn't do anything right away. No, you see, hours pass, and it's like the 7th nap time we tried to force upon these kids. And I'm sitting in a chair, and I've got a baby in my arms, rocking it to sleep, and Landon's sitting at my feet playing with Legos, and it is a blissful, peaceful moment of tranquility, like take a picture and put it on a Hallmark Christmas card kind of moment. And then suddenly, without any warning, Lennon leaps from where he's at and he grabs my Adam's apple. Not the whole throat, just the Adam's apple, which really hurts as he starts to squeeze and he's strangling me and he's screaming, "Chirp, chirp, why won't you chirp?" So I have a decision to make here. I could either drop the baby and punch the 4-year-old, getting sued for many reasons, or I could be known as the guy who died strangled to death by a 4-year-old. I choose a third option, and as Landon is screaming, "Chirp, chirp," and he's strangling me, I, as a grown man, start to chirp like a baby bird. Yeah, laugh it up, Christians. All right. And then when the darkness is starting to creep in around me and I'm sitting there thinking, this is how I go, this is the end of me, Landon gets satisfied with enough chirps and he lets go and he goes back to playing with Legos like nothing ever happened. How rude is that, right? This is why I think those who work in preschool and children's ministry are the bravest workers in the church, people. Now, I love telling that story. That's one of my favorite stories to tell. But I also love telling just any story because something remarkable happens when we tell a story. Because when we tell a story, it brings strangers together, and now we have a common bond which unites us, which brings entertainment to us, or which might even inspire us, which I don't think being strangled by a 4-year-old would inspire anybody, okay, other than don't have kids yet, all right? But stories are incredibly powerful, and we are people of stories. That's part of what being a Christian is that we are tethered to the greatest story ever told, and the fact that we who are sinners, God who created us, did not decide to destroy us, but decided to come and invest into our world in order to save us, because we could not save ourselves. Thus enters Jesus. And this time of year, that's what Christmas is about, is remembering the story that God did not turn his back on us, but he invaded our world to dwell in the mess of our world so he can bring the broken pieces of this world back together one life at a time. And this morning, we get to talk not only just about that story, but we are talking about a guy named John the Baptist in the Gospel of Luke in chapter 3. If you have a Bible and you want to turn there, feel free to. And John is rather unique because he was the guy who came right before Jesus. In fact, they're cousins, and it's a few years before Jesus kind of reveals himself and starts his own ministry, that John's whole purpose, his whole life story was about proclaiming that one day God was going to come back and that we needed to be ready for it. Because God had not forgotten us, and God was about to do something great. So this was John's whole purpose, is to prepare people for what was to come. Which brings us now to Luke chapter 3, where we get to see, where John is proclaiming that you need something in life, and we get to see what is that something which we all desperately need in the darkness of this world. So read with me Luke chapter 3, where we jump in right at the first verse. It says, "In the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, Pontius Pilate being governor of Judea, and Herod being tetrarch of Galilee, and his brother Philip, tetrarch of the region of Iturea and Trachonitis, and Lysanias, tetrarch of Abilene, during the high priesthood of Ananias and Sapphira." Let me just go and stop there. I don't expect you guys to know all these people. I don't know all these people. I don't understand really, wait, Luke, what are these people? I don't even know if I pronounce all the names right, okay? And that's not the point of what Luke is saying here. Luke is saying, look, this is a time of very powerful individuals, men and women who live in palaces, who have servants, who have all the food and wine and pleasure that they could possibly want. This is a world of very powerful individuals, but God does something remarkable in what we're about to read next, and that God doesn't go to any of them when he's beginning his big plan of putting the pieces of our world back together. No, what happens is, picking up where we left off, it says, "The word of God came to John, the son of Zechariah, in the wilderness. And he went into all the region around the Jordan, proclaiming a baptism of repentance for the forgiveness of sins." You see, in a time well known for the rule of powerful individuals, of emperors and kings and priests, where the strong ruled in their pseudo-strength and they ignored the weak that were on their doorsteps, God did not go to any of them. He did not go to those with all the things that they could possibly ever need in this world, the ones that we think God is going to use them to do great things. God doesn't go to them. Instead, he goes to a man named John because he goes to the humblest of men to bestow the highest of callings. And John is not a man that any of us would ever think capable of doing something great. I mean, he is this crazy homeless man. He lives in the desert. He lives with camel hair as part of his clothing, which if you've ever pet a camel, it's not very comfortable clothing. And he survives on locusts, which I've had locusts. It's not very sustaining. It's kind of gross. And this is John. He's this crazy man in the desert. And God says, I want to use you, John, to prepare people's hearts for the big thing I'm about to do. And so John goes around, he starts proclaiming, hey, God is about to come and rescue us. God is going to fulfill all of his promises. He has not forgotten us. He is going to save us. And it's time that we get ready for it. So John starts to do something remarkable. And the fact that he starts to baptize others. Now, let me tell you why this is remarkable. See, he didn't invent baptism, okay? Baptism was a thing that was already existing before this, but baptism was a little bit different before John showed up. Because for baptism for the Jews, it was kind of like you took a bath before you came to worship God, which I think is just a great practice anyways before you come here, take a bath, okay? And so John, he does something remarkably different because everyone kind of baptized themselves before they came to meet God. And John gets nicknamed the baptizer because part of his job is other people come to him and say, would you please baptize me to be ready with God? And this is remarkable because what John is saying by doing this is that you are not good enough on your own to come before God. You're not smart enough, you're not talented enough, you don't have enough resources, you don't do enough good charity in the world. You are not good enough in your sin and depravity for holy and righteous God to come and make yourself clean. Someone else has got to do that, and that someone else is God. And John is kind of representing what God is doing, saying that God has to make you ready and prepared to meet with God. But you can't do it on your own. And this is remarkable, the things he's doing. It's changing everything. People are like, whoa, we got to be preparing ourselves for God to come and do this, but God's got to be the one who's going to save us. We can't prepare ourselves or make ourselves good enough to be saved. But God's got to be the one to save us. God's got to do all the work. We just got to surrender to him. And so this is what John is proclaiming before Jesus even started his ministry. But John was also part of something much bigger than just that. He was about proclaiming a message that God was going to fix things, that God was going to bring the broken pieces of our world caused by our sin. He was going to bring them together in the form of a Messiah that we see in Isaiah chapter 11. Of this Messiah, this king that John is proclaiming, saying a king is coming. This is what the king is like in Isaiah that's described. In verse 1, it says, there shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse, and a branch from his roots shall bear fruit. Now, Jesse was the father of King David. You know, David and Goliath and all. So what it's saying is, look, the family line of the kings has been eradicated, but there's going to be a rebirth. Where everyone thought God was done with the kings, there's going to be another king. And this king, what he's like is where we pick up, where it says, and the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him. A spirit of wisdom and understanding, the spirit of counsel and might, the spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. And his delight shall be in the fear of the Lord. He shall not judge by what his eyes see, or decide disputes by what his ears hear, but with righteousness he shall judge the poor, and decide with equity for the meek of the earth. And he shall strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips he shall kill the wicked. Righteousness shall be the belt of his waist, and faithfulness the belt of his loins. See, what Isaiah is saying, and what John was proclaiming, is that in a time of darkness, in a time of despair, in a time of hopelessness, God was on the move, and that God was going to give them a king who was going to put the pieces back together, who had not forgotten them, who still loved them. And this king is not like any other king. And we know this king to be Jesus Christ. And he is not like the kings of old, for they failed in comparison to him. Because where he is good, they were wrong, they were evil. And so he is saying, look, this king has righteousness and faithfulness at the core of his being. The God's Spirit will rest upon him, shaping him, molding him, guiding him to be unlike anything this world has ever seen. He will have a wisdom greater than Solomon's, a strength mightier than Samson. He will have a deep love and reverence for God that's greater than King David. He is the one, when he speaks, life happens. When he speaks, the darkness crumbles and flees from him. Everything he does is good and righteous. This is King Jesus, and he is not like us. Let me be very clear about that, because this passage is not talking about you or me. It's not talking about the church or any sort of government. It's talking about Jesus, and we so oftentimes can forget these things because we love to have the interest upon us. That's just our natural wiring. That if we hear a story, if we watch a movie, somehow we empathize with the characters and we start to think that is us, that we're just like that. And if we can't find anything that connects us or that matters to us, we ask in our minds, so what? And we lose interest. And we do this when we read the Bible. Of looking for, hey, let me find something that applies to my life. But the Bible is not written to talk about you. It was written to talk about God. And we do the same thing sometimes on Sunday mornings with the sermons and stuff like that, where you sit there and you start to think in your mind, so what? What does this have to do with my life? What does this have to do with all my problems? And if you can't find any sort of connection, you lose interest. Because we incorporate church to be about us. But let me tell you, that is not my job. My job is to proclaim who God is. Because life, if you haven't figured this out, life is not about you. Life is about Jesus. And when we reverse the two, there are always problems that come about. And we do this all the time, where we like to be the center of focus, where our life revolves around us and our enjoyment, our entertainment, our pleasures. It's all about us. You don't believe me? Have you ever tried to be the smartest person in the room? Have you ever sat there and wondered when other people are opening gifts on Christmas thinking, I wish I'd gotten that instead of them? Ever devise a plan for your life and you try to follow it to the letter? Or when other people talk about their plans and futures for their life, that you kind of butt in and you're like, let me tell you why you're wrong and why you should do this instead. Or get offended if someone does the same thing to you? Ever tried to be the most talented? The center of attention? That when everyone's in a group and they're talking, that you have to say something to draw the attention back to you? And let's talk about me and my problems, or let me tell you about this great thing I've ever done. We all do this. And if you're sitting there thinking, well, that's not me, you are in more trouble than you think, because that is a pride that is even greater, and that's a problem. See, we all do this. We all try to make ourselves this king that was talked about in Isaiah, that John proclaimed. None of us are like this. Nobody was proclaiming your coming birth and arrival centuries before it happened. No one was going before anyone else saying, hey, you got to see what God is going to do in this person's life. No one was doing that for you. If anything, maybe people just ran ahead of you and say, hey, you got to watch out, they're on their way. And it's not in a good sense in which they were saying that. See, we are not this king. And when we try to make ourselves the king, when we try to make ourselves the center of the universe, what life is all about, a God, problems happen. See, life is not about you. Life is about Jesus. And what's beautiful is that God's ideal king, when he describes what his king is going to be like, who's going to fix the world, it's nothing like us, because the world does not need more of us. it needs more of Jesus. It doesn't need more of your talents and your gifts and your charity and all the good works you do, which all of that is wonderful. It does not need more of that. It needs more of Jesus than what it needs of you. That's why we gather, to proclaim that. Because only Jesus can do what Jesus has done. That's to save sinners. That's to work to put the broken pieces back together. And Isaiah talks about that in the very next verse from where we left off in verse 6. He describes what the outcome of what this king's rule will be like. He says in verse 6, he says, "The wolf shall dwell with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the young goat, and the calf and the lion and the fattened calf together, and a little child shall lead them." Now, that's a lot of figurative language. I mean, we don't really talk about that, but talk like that. But this is all figurative language to describe the kind of world that God is intending to create, where things that were broken are restored and put back together to the way they were supposed to be, and it's permanent and it's good. And God's been about that work for 2,000 years now, of working to put the pieces back together to show us what we really need most this time of year. And it's this, that you need something better than yourself. And his name is Jesus. You need something better than yourself. And that something is not that big house. It's not that gift this year. It's not that promotion or that particular job or that wealth and the income. It's not having that trophy spouse or the wonderful kids that are always obedient and never do anything wrong or anything like that. Like, that's not what you need. What you need is a someone, and his name is Jesus. And oh, how desperately we need to be reminded. Because we live in a world that's broken, where cancer exists, where school shootings seem to happen all the time nowadays, where car crashes happen, where marriages fall apart, where homes and families are broken apart by tragedy and chaos, where we have a government that splits over race sometimes, led by the very people that we thought would bring us back together. Or just politics I'm looking at this week. And in all of that, we were reminded that there are many wolves out there. But here's the truth. We ourselves can be wolves. That's why I think that while we are called to proclaim what God has done, we can be very bad at it sometimes. Because we're called to be lambs in the big story which God has created. We're called when troubles come, when threats arise, when the wolves are at the door. We're called to run to our shepherd, to ask him to fight for us, to defend us. He's the one who loves us and cares for us. But you know what we tend to do? When the wolves are at the door, we tend to bite and snarl and growl like wolves, because at our nature, that is what we are. That's why I say what I say next. I don't say it lightly. I say it on the basis of the fact that we are all sinners, deprived in what we have done before a holy and righteous God, that we are all sinners under the wrath of God. And it only makes sense, therefore, that some have entered this place as wolves, and some have entered as lambs, and even more as wolves who think that they are lambs. Some of us are sitting on one side of the room because we're trying to avoid someone else sitting on the other side. Some of us are greedy and are jealous of the things that other people have. And we try to plot and find ways to get that, even sometimes at the expense of others. Some of us, family season, are wondering if this is the last holiday that we're going to have as a family because you're thinking about leaving your family. Some of us, our wolves are a little bit more personal and a little bit more private. It's not something that's outside of us. It's something within us. And so maybe it's those whispers of loneliness, of fear, of anxiety and depression that war against you. Those feelings that make you feel like that if anyone in this room knew what you have done, that they wouldn't accept you, and therefore you feel like, I don't belong in this group. I understand all those because I have experienced all of them, either as the victim or the perpetrator, either as the lamb or the wolf. It is not in our nature to love God and love people. We are wolves by nature who only seek to devour each other because our focus is individually, our focus is all about us and getting what makes us happy, what interests us. Who cares if it hurts someone else what we do? For we are all wolves. Oh, who will dare to save us? Who could possibly love us? For who all the people that we have hurt in life, who could dare to even look at us and give us mercy and grace? Because it shouldn't be God in all of his holiness and righteousness. And yet God still loves us. God who created us, who we have hurt more than anyone else, by the things we've said, by the things we've done, and our deprived nature before his holiness. And yet he still loves you. Yet when you feel like no one else loves you, he is still there, shouting from the cross, mine, when he declares it over you. That he still loves you. That he hasn't given up on you. That though we might be wolves, he has come to take our burdens, to face the conflict which none of us could defeat, and that was sin and death. And so he died upon a cross for sinners like you who have nothing about you that should make you worthy of it, but only because he is that loving. And so that by your surrender to him, he can make things right. He can make our world right. He can make our hearts right. He can make us right. He can make our marriages right. He can make our lives right. He can make it all right when we have the courage to say to him, Jesus, I am tired of being the king and the God of my life. Won't you please save me? So that he can put the pieces back together. So that he can turn wolves and turn them into lambs, because this is his big plan that he's been working for thousands of years, which we get to be part of in this big gathering. This is what we proclaim, that we are not perfect, that we don't have perfect lives, that our kids are not perfect, our spouses are not perfect, our friends are not perfect. We are all imperfect people who are all broken, who are all pointing to the fact that there is a God who is perfect, who loves us even still, who has not given up on us, who has not forgotten us, who knows everything we're going through, and he still loves us this Christmas season. And he still wants us to know him. That's the story of our gathering. That one life at a time, God is putting the pieces back together, and one day the wolves and the lambs shall lie down together and bowing before the great King. That's the story of our gathering. That's what Christmas is about. That God invaded our world in the form of Jesus in order to make this a reality. That's what our Sunday mornings are about. That's why in 2 weeks, we're going to have sign-ups for small groups so that you can be in close-knit communities with significant relationships that are all about reminding you that life is not about you, it's about Jesus, and that is a glorious freedom and the ability to be able to say that. So it's wonderful to hear at the Bluff, we're not all about the flash and prestige or anything like that, because the focus is not on us. The focus is all about pointing to how wonderful Jesus is, how he gives us value, how he forgives us of our sins, how he gives us purpose, and he changes our lives. He changes lambs like us, and he turns them into those lambs when we were wolves. And he could do the same for you. And that's a story that's far better than being strangled to death by a 4-year-old. That's a story that's a story which everyone gets to be part of. I think I just lost everyone right there. It's wonderful, though. It's wonderful, though, that we get to be part of that story here. In this family, in this gathering, that the whole purpose of our lives is to point to Jesus. Say, look, he is the one who saved us. He's the one who's investing in us. He's the one who believes in us and has given us value, and he loves us. And it's a joy that we get to tell others, not only that God gets to love us, but that God still loves those we come into contact with. And so here in a minute, the band's going to come up, and they're going to sing, and they're going to lead us in worship of how much we can adore this wonderful King Jesus. And if it's during that time that something speaks within you to make you realize that what you need most in life is Jesus, but you realize you do not have this Jesus in your life, but you want him. You're tired of being a wolf. You're ready to be a lamb. Then please, during that time or any other time, please come find me or one of the elders that's going to be in the back of the room, because we love having those conversations. We love to see people who have the courage to be willing to say, I'm not all right. I want Jesus in my life, and I want him to put my life back together and to save me because we so desperately need it. And so during that time, you're more than welcome to talk to us and to join with us as we proclaim that we all need something better in life, and his name is Jesus. So won't you pray with me? Father, you are so amazing. Not just in the fact that you look for the humblest of people to do your great works, to proclaim your name like you did for John the Baptist, whose whole life was about preparing people's hearts for what you were going to do in Jesus. But thank you so much for Jesus, who when we did not deserve it, when we don't deserve love and forgiveness for our sin and depravity, you still loved us. And you're greater than our sin. You're greater than our problems and our brokenness, and you want to put us back together. So thank you so much for that. So Father, we surrender to you. We give you everything, Father, so that you can change everything and remind us of how good you are this Christmas season and how you came to dwell in our lives. It's in your name I pray.